This is my final presentation for Environmental and Occupational Health, University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. Disclaimer: this is a student presentation using a hypothetical scenario for educational purposes. The presenter is a student at UAMS, not a representative of the agency named in the following slides. The information contained herein does not necessarily reflect the views of said agency. Hello, my name is Rachel Degood. I am an occupational health consultant, and I am here to talk to you today at Contero Construction about UV exposure. So UV exposure. Today we're going to be talking about what is UV radiation, what are the benefits of UV radiation, what are the risks of UV radiation, exposure measurements. We're also going to look at safety and preventative measures. So, what is UV radiation? UV radiation is short for ultraviolet radiation. Ultraviolet radiation is a form of non-ionizing radiation. There are three types: UVA, UVB, and UVC. Now, UV radiation is classified based on its wavelength. So UVA is not absorbed by the ozone layer, and it penetrates deep into the deepest layer of our skin, into the dermis. UVB is partially absorbed by some of the ozone layer, but some of it still does reach the surface, but it doesn't penetrate as deep into our skin. So it stops around the skin surface and the epidermis. UVC is the type of UV radiation that is completely absorbed by the ozone layer and the atmosphere. Now, sources of UV radiation include natural sources and artificial sources. So a natural source is the sun, while artificial sources are things like UV lights, lasers, tanning beds, and some welding. So the benefits of UV radiation. The biggest benefit of UV radiation is vitamin D. So we get vitamin D from the sun and we absorb it through our skin. Now we get some vitamin D from our diet, from things like milk and salmon, and then our body processes that through our livers and our kidneys. But a lot of our vitamin D comes from the sun. And it is important because vitamin D is important with calcium homeostasis, muscle health, bone health, and regulation of our cell growth and preventing cancer. Now, as for recommended exposure, the National Institute of Health recommends that we get 5 to 30 minutes of sun exposure between 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. daily, or at a minimum of at least 2 times a week. Now, as for the risks of UV radiation, so there are short-term risks and there are long-term risks. The short-term risk that most people are probably pretty familiar with is sunburns. So the sunburn just kind of temporarily, in most cases, damages the skin. It can be to certain degrees though. So a first degree burn is going to burn the epidermis, while a second degree is a little bit deeper into the dermis. And then third degree burn can be pretty serious and damage down low and get a little bit of the nerves and the blood vessels. Now, as for long-term risks of UV radiation, skin cancer, cataracts, and premature aging. So if you see in this top picture, you'll see various types of different skin cancers. They can look a little bit different depending on what type there is. Now, cataracts, you can see on the middle left, there's a picture of a normal eye and a cataract eye, and cataracts can cause blindness. And then as for the image on the right, that is a woman who is a truck driver. And so the right side of her face you can tell is a little bit more wrinkled and aged than the other side, because that was the side that faced outside towards the window and got more sun exposure compared to the other side while she was driving a truck. Now, here are some quick facts. So skin cancer is the most common cancer in the United States according to the American Academy of Dermatology. The current estimates are that 1 in 5 Americans will develop skin cancer in their lifetime, according to the American Academy of Dermatology. Now, as for occupational hazards, it's estimated that 1 in 3 skincare deaths were estimated to have been caused by outdoor occupational sun exposure by the World Health Organization. And then as for global estimates, you'll see on the right we have some from the World Health Organization. Globally in 2020, over 1.5 million cases of skin cancers were diagnosed, and over 120,000 skin cancer associated deaths were reported. And no, that's just deaths that were actually reported. There were some not included in that estimate. And also the 2020 worldwide estimate is that 15 million people are blind due to cataracts, and 10% of this may be to UV exposure. Now, measuring exposure. So how to measure UV exposure, see when we're at risk and when we're not at risk. So the UV index is a scale to measure the UV exposure. So it runs from 1 to 11 plus. 1 is the lowest on the scale. Typically around 1 it's low. There's no protection needed. And then 11 being the highest. When it's 11, it's best to stay inside if you can. So the higher the UV index, the greater the potential for the damage to skin and eye, and also less time it takes for it to occur. So if you look on the left, you'll see this chart of the UV index for New York City. So UV index will fluctuate because of different factors. So typically in the morning it's pretty low, and then it reaches its peak around lunchtime, around 12 noon, and then it goes back down around 4 p.m. And so the index on the left is an example of New York, and each line represents a different date. So the lines towards the bottom are January and December, and then the lines at the very top are in the summer, around June, July, whenever the UV index is the highest because of the seasons. And you can see that it fluctuates during the year. In January and December, the peak around noon, the UV index is about 1 or 2 for the whole day, while in the summer around June, July, it is up around 9 or 10. And the factors that impact the exposure are things like elevation of the sun. So typically the higher the sun is in the sky, the higher the UV radiation level. and that's why UV radiation levels vary with the time of the day, time of the year. So another thing that impacts exposure is latitude. So the closer to the equatorial regions, the higher the UV radiation level. Cloud cover. UV radiation levels are the highest under cloudless skies, but that does not mean that if there are a bunch of clouds, the UV radiation cannot be high. Regardless of whether there are clouds or not, it can still be up there. So don't let that fool you. Altitude. So at higher altitudes, a thinner atmosphere absorbs less of the UV radiation. Ozone. So ozone absorbs some UV radiation that would otherwise reach the Earth's surface. The ozone completely blocks the UVC radiation and it blocks some UVB. But the ozone levels vary over the year and across the days, so this might lead the UV index to fluctuate. So ground reflection. Ground reflection is when light is reflected up from the ground back onto us. So an example of this would be things like snow, water, beach sand, or sea foam. Those can reflect the light back up onto us and increase it. Okay, so some safety and preventative measures. So one thing we can do is wear our PPE. Things like long sleeve shirts and hats, sunglasses. Regardless of whether your sunglasses are extra blocking or just some cheap sunglasses, it still helps to cut back and protect your eyes. You can see on the bottom right corner, there are two men working out in the field, and they have some good PPE on. They have a hat that covers their head, covers their ears, some glasses to keep the light from damaging their eyes, and then they have a little mask and long sleeve to reduce what skin is exposed to the light. We can reduce sun exposure and seek shade when possible. Now, for your job, this might not be possible in most circumstances since you would be out working in the construction field, but just to try to attempt to cut back when possible. If it is not needed, don't stand out on the direct sun. Stand under the shade or even set up maybe a little canopy to stand under. Sunscreen. So it's best to have SPF 15 plus sunscreen and to make sure you're applying this every 2 hours, making sure you're covering your face, your arms, your ears, even the hard to reach areas. Okay, so what to do? So after you've been exposed to sun, you might want to try to prevent cancer and catch it early. So perform skin self-examinations. So you can look in the mirror yourself, or you can also have a buddy do it. Have your friend or family member try to help you out and look on hard to reach places. But you can stand in front of a mirror and just routinely check every month, every few weeks. Make sure there are not any new growths or anything that looks unusual. Look at your back, your arms. You can get a little handheld mirror and check things like the back of your neck. Check the palms of your hands, the palms of your feet, everything. And then you want to look out for the ABC. So on the right, we have a little diagram. It says asymmetry, border, color, diameter, evolving. And so these are things that you want to look for. So asymmetry, you want to see if the mole looks a little bit odd. it's not exactly symmetric, then you might want to get that checked out. It could be a warning sign for melanoma. The border. So the borders of an early melanoma can be uneven, it can be scalloped or notched. Color. Having a variety of colors is another warning signal. A number of different shades, brown, tan, or black could appear, or anything odd or out of the blue. Diameter. Melanomas are usually larger in diameter than the size of an eraser on your pencil. And then evolving. So if you have a mole that starts to change in any odd way, size, shape, color, elevation, bleeding, itching, crusting, anything like that, it is best to just get that checked out and schedule an appointment with the dermatologist. Now, you can do this if you think you're starting to have a mole come up that is a little bit odd, or you could always just schedule an appointment just to get things checked out routinely. Maybe some people do it every few years. Thank you. These are my references, and I hope you have a great day.